All right, everybody. Welcome. Good afternoon, or in Laura's case, good late evening. Thank you so much for staying up and joining us. Welcome to everyone. I know that we have some people from all over the country and some people that are going to be joining us here as well. Uh, to be able to, taste at this point, if virtually, because I know that Laura, you visit the U.S. Quite often, and I know that you would much rather be able to come and visit around the country to your fans and trade. But thank you for doing this for our first official VinConnect sponsored tasting, and no better to be able to do it with you. So to give everyone kind of a little bit of a run of show, I've basically muted everyone at this point so that we can hear Laura, and then I'll open that up. If you have any questions, there's the chat function in there. I'll be kind of monitoring that as we go along. If there are any questions, and I'll open that up to those individuals if you have questions, allow you to ask the question yourself and be able to just kind of move it along. So we have a couple very exciting specific wines we'll be talking about, and also just kind of hearing the status of Monsanto. So Castello di Monsanto, one of our great VinConnect partners, and we're excited to have Laura here. So Laura, welcome. Welcome to everyone. So tell us, how is life in Tuscany these days?
Thank you, John. Happy to be with you tonight. For me tonight, for you evening. Well, the situation in Tuscany is getting better. For sure, it's been a couple of months really tough. But it's getting better and better in terms of contagions and infections. So we are crossing fingers. Of course, the winery never closed because all the agriculture activities have been able to stay open because we need to take care of the vineyards and also going on in the cellar and what needed to be done for the wine. So we've always been open.
Excellent. And so far, how has the year been? I know that it's still quite early and weather is starting to turn a little bit, but what have you noticed so far with 2020 in the vineyards?
Yeah, the winter has been very mild and also dry. The months of January and February, very small quantity of rain. We had some rain, thank to God, in April. This helped a lot. So we are about 10 days ahead. So the opening of the buds was a little bit earlier. And now the vines are ready, Sangiovese like this. Mm-hmm. And you can see the little benches. So we can already estimate the quantity. It's too early to say. It seems to be also good quantity.
More life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we hope, certainly everything, it sounds like you're kind of ahead of where we are in the U.S. with some potential positivity with being able to have a little bit more normalcy in your day. And so, we've come here to talk about a couple specific wines with the Il Poggio, but if you can give kind of a little bit just a background of, how your family came to where you are there in Tuscany, and how, your family started to get involved, with the winery, and where you are today.
So the property, the winery, has been existing since 1700. Was owned by a family from Florence, and is located in the village of Monsanto. Monsanto in the Italian language means holy mountain, because a saint died here in the Middle Age, and the church paid homage to this man, calling the village holy place, holy mountain. But the property became a real winery only when my grandfather bought the estate. I'm the third generation. He was born in San Gimignano, the beautiful medieval village near here. He needed to move to Milan before World War II, and after the war, he wanted to find a place near his native village. So he came here at Monsanto. He opened the windows of the castle. He saw San Gimignano, and he said, "This is the place." So he felt in love in the landscape. But my grandfather didn't know anything about wine. It was my father, Fabrizio, who really understood the potential of this place. He started to open the bottles in the cellar with my grandmom, who was producing wine in Piedmont, and for sure transmitted to him a Piemontese mentality in winemaking. And the adventure started with the first harvest made in 1962, with a great vision also, because this area was really poor in the 60s. And Chianti Classico was, let's say, an easy drinking wine for every day, also cheap wine. I'm sure most of you remember the straw flask. So it was an area that needed a lot of vision and investment, of course. At that time, there were just 5 hectares planted.
Really?
The total property is 230 hectares, and we are located on 2 hills. If you see the map of Chianti Classico, which is the region between Florence and Siena, it's about 60 kilometers, the entire denomination. We are located in the central west side of Chianti Classico, in the district of Barberino Valdelsa. And for sure, I could say that Chianti Classico is a little bit like Burgundy. So it's an area where we have a lot of different types of soil, microclimate, and the area where we are located is for sure characterized by the air, the ventilation coming from the ocean, because we are just about 50 kilometers far from the Tyrrhenic Sea, so from Bulgaria, to give you an idea. And this area is influenced by air coming from west, from the sea. And for sure, it's characterizing the style of the wine, the style of Sangiovese, born on this side of Chianti Classico. We're speaking about the story, and I like to say that my father has been for sure a revolutionary man for the denomination, because when he started in the 60s, for instance, he created in 1962 the first recognized single vineyard of Chianti Classico. Il Poggio is certified as the first crew ever made. And he made a lot of revolution in the winemaking in the 60s and the 70s. He eliminated the use of the white grapes in 68. Was illegal. Nobody put him in jail, but at that time it was illegal. He introduced in the early 70s fermentation in stainless steel, which was really something new in the area. So many changes that for sure we can say he has been a pioneer for Chianti Classico.
Certainly. Laura, when he first kind of recognized Il Poggio as a cru site or somewhere that needed to be produced on its own, what was kind of the reaction of the producers around? And because I know that sometimes if you do different things, especially in Italy, the whole community has an opinion. What was kind of the opinion of his neighbors and of other producers in the area when he decided to make that single vineyard wine?
Well, honestly, in that moment, in that historical moment, there was really something crazy. People didn't understand what he was doing. I remember my father, telling us stories. My father always believed in the capacity of aging of this wine. And so since the beginning, since the early 60s, he kept an incredible amount of bottle in the cellar to create an archive, a library, to show the beauty of Sangiovese with the aging. And a lot of people in the 60s and in the 70s were telling him, "Are you crazy? Why are you not selling this wine? What are you doing?" And now we have, a real treasure. We have probably the largest archive all over Chianti Classico. I would say one of the largest in Italy. So we are still able to show all the vintages.
Yeah. And if for the guests here, if you haven't seen, if either photos or been able to visit the winery, it's a pretty incredible cellar that you're not really sure when it's going to end, with how many different kind of little pockets there are there, and the ability to see back into the history of Il Poggio and of the different wines there is definitely something that's very unique, and I think gives the whole region something to be able to see the development of the wines there. So for Il Poggio, we have the 09 and the 15 vintage from kind of the, where this wine started in 1962 over the course of the last few decades. Where kind of has the evolvement of the wine been from, just focusing on a single vineyard to kind of where over the last maybe, 10, 15, 20 years, the development of it since the start?
Yeah, I could say there are 4 different steps in the evolution of this wine. The first one is 62, 67. The wine was produced in the most traditional way, so including the Trebbiano and the Malvasia, the white grapes, including the stem. So the grape were not destemmed, but the fermentation was made with stems. And also the use, my father used to make the Governo alla Toscana, was a system of re-fermentation very common on that period in Tuscany, adding dry grapes at the end of the first fermentation, so a second fermentation started. So this is the period 60-67. Then in 68, the big revolutions. No more white grapes, no stems, no Governo alla Toscana. And aging in chestnut cask, because at that time was much easier to find this type of barrel made with chestnut than oak, because chestnut are tree that we can find in Italy. So at the beginning of the 70s, he started with 2 other big changes, Slavonian oak and stainless steel fermentation. And until, this formula never changed until the beginning of the 90s. The aging was in larger cask, and for a very long period, 3 years and a half. So the real old way to produce Sangiovese. Then at the beginning of the 90s, we started to introduce some barriques, also because it was the moment to experiment this new type of aging. And it lasted for about 10 years, even less. At the beginning of 2000, I decided to go back to the Slavonian oak, the larger barrel, or to Tonneau, depending on vintages. But the system of fermentation, honestly, in the last 20 years, didn't change. It's the same. What is important for Il Poggio? Il Poggio in the Italian language means the top of the hill, the crest of the hill. So it's the vineyard is covering the highest part of the property. It's 5.2 hectares large, and has 4 exposures because it's covering all the top. So the harvest is made in 3 different moments. Usually the central west side is earlier than the northern side of the vineyard. And so we create and we ferment separately 3 lots, three different parts of the wine. And only later we decide, depending on the vintage, if all the trees are going to produce the Chianti Classico, this wine. In some vintages, maybe some recently 2014, was challenging vintage. We decided to use only some of the grapes, not all of them.
Some of that. Interesting. I'm gonna turn to John Hunt real quick because I know that he has a question about some of the past vintages that. So John, you want to ask your question?
Oh, sure. Thank you very much. So it was really kind of neat to hear about you called it a library or your stockpile or your Fort Knox of all elder bottles. And do any of them particularly stick out to you in either way? Like that if you could make this same wine exactly the same way and just wow everybody, you would do it over and over, get the Xerox machine out, or there's some you just run away from. I'm curious whether any of them have affected you in either direction.
It's like to speak about your children and you need to pick some of them. But
I got a child I trade for one of those, some of those online. That's just between you and me.
But for sure, there are some favorite vintages. Let's say in the 60s, one of my favorite is 69. Another great vintage, 71 and 75. In the 80s, in this moment, I love 85, 88, outstanding vintage. In the 90s, maybe, even if has been very austere, a difficult child at the beginning, but now is spectacular, is 1999. It took a while, but it's showing fantastic. Another great vintage, 01, 2010, incredible vintage. And honestly, I love 15. 15 is has an incredible potential for me.
Yeah. Well, yes, I came in at 2010. That's where my experience with your winery begins, and that I agree with you. It was really very nice. And yeah. Golly, I only have a couple left.
Good. But of course, there are also children less performance. We produce a Poggio only in the best vintage when the wine convince has 100%, of course. And recently, for instance, a very challenging vintage was 14. But we made a lot of selection of benches, really a bench per vine. And when I tasted the result, we told ourselves we need to make it because it's so good, even if will be not easy to sell, because a lot of people are, when they say a vintage, not so happy vintage, people react, oh no, but then you taste the wine, you understand. And for a winemaker to make a great wine also in a difficult vintage is a big satisfaction. Something I mean, to produce a great wine in a great vintage, a little bit easier.
Well, certainly, and I know that the 2014 vintage definitely had a big effect on the path of Chianti Classico as a region. Before we get to that and move into the 15, can you talk a little bit about the 2009 vintage, which labeled as Chianti Classico Reserva? And so I know that you're re-releasing some of that to us here, which we definitely appreciate. And Rachel was nice enough to send me some of it as well. So definitely encourage everyone else to, we'll send you the info at the end of this about how to get it yourself, but would love to hear your thoughts on the 09 vintage for Il Poggio.
Yeah, '09 was a great vintage, perfect weather. We had a mild winter, a good spring with water, with rain. So it's really important to create a reserve of water for the vine to express themselves during the summer. The summer was hot in 2009. But starting from middle of August, great excursion night and day of temperature, and this is very important to develop the aromas of the grape. And then September was nice weather, but I remember with several days of rain too. But the grape arrived at the cellar really wholesome, perfect maturation. So consider a great vintage also for the entire denomination. Chianti Classico has been considered a 5 stars vintage 2009. Mm-hmm. And I think that Il Poggio can show itself, start to show the best of itself 10 years from the harvest. So the 09 is, in this moment, a wine that can really express what is Il Poggio, mm-hmm. Showing the complexity of the aroma. The aromas start to be really very generous. Because our Sangiovese, when it's young, it could be a little austere in the nose, and with some aging in the bottle, really is able to give a lot in this term. And then the tannin are firm, but now more rounder, juicy, with some sweetness. So a perfect balance for the 09 in this moment.
What do you really see? And obviously every vintage is different. The kind of typical range that you would say for Il Poggio, 09 is at that 11-year point at this, the typical range that you notice is kind of the average sweet spot for Il Poggio to kind of be in the best place.
I think for a wine is like a human being, okay? There is a curve. So when it's young, is great, but it's still too nervous. After 10 years, I start to be at the peak, depending on the vintages, of course, and then stay on the peak for other 20 years. And then, of course, there is a going down, but I love all the wines, so even if, of course, there is no more the power of the younger wine, there is an incredible complexity of aroma and taste that a 30 or 40 or 50 years old wine is a unique experience. So my favorite point is usually between 25 and 35 years old.
So definitely a good sweet.
But it's my personal.
Of course. Of course. I know that some of them, drink, a little bit more vibrant young, and obviously that's very much of the vintage. So you had mentioned before about 2014, how to, possibly make that wine. 2014 was also a very, interesting year in Chianti Classico with the introduction of Gran Selezione into production, and then with 2015 here, being Gran Selezione. Can you kind of talk about how Il Poggio as a wine really kind of led and influenced, the region to want to classify something like Gran Selezione?
Yeah, briefly I explain that Gran Selezione is a new mention that started 5 years ago. The Chianti Classico denomination decided to add a new classification. Okay? Like in a pyramid, we have now Gran Selezione, Riserva, and Annata. So the youngest release in Chianti Classico is the Annata, then Riserva, minimum 2 years of aging and a richer wine than Annata, and then now Gran Selezione. When the Gran Selezione was released as a classification, I was not so happy, I need to be honest, because I wanted a more restricted regulation. I think that if Chianti Classico needed a new appellation, should have been something really able to show the peak of the pyramid. So a single vineyard, longer aging, and for me, Sangiovese,
sure.
without the possibility to use the international varietal, the 20% option. So at the beginning I said no. For Il Poggio, I mean, Monsanto has been producing Gran Selezione since 1962. That's the concept of Gran Selezione with Il Poggio. Yeah. So at the beginning I say no, we'll stay Riserva forever. Then I realized that there is a big movement inside the area, the denomination, where many producers want to create Gran Selezione as a real single vineyard. I mean, something really the top of their production. And there is a big movement that probably will bring of the Gran Selezione the geographical mentions, the possibility to write on the label the subzones inside Chianti Classico. And this movement is also asking for a minimum of 90% or 95% Sangiovese plus indigenous varietal, so without any international French varietal.
Like I know some producers add Cabernet and some other things into that as well, which is I know very kind of against the philosophy of the traditions of the region. So
right. So in 2014, in a challenging vintage, I decided to move from Riserva to Gran Selezione. To say this is the way how it should be Gran Selezione.
And so can you talk about the 2015 vintage, which is Gran Selezione, still Il Poggio, how that vintage was and how maybe it compares to, in your mind, 2009 at this point, and how it kind of fits into the storied history of the vineyard.
Yeah, 15 was an amazing vintage in Chianti Classico because the weather was perfect. The winter and the spring were similar to 2009, a little less rain than in 2009 in the spring. This summer was beautiful, hot, but not exaggerating hot, with some rain in the middle of August, which is the perfect what we really desire. A warm July and then a warm August, but 3-4 days of rain, and that happened in 15. And then a beautiful dry September, but not too hot. So the perfect weather to bring the grape at the phenolic maturation. 15 is a vintage for sure for longer aging. The tannin, the texture of the tannin can tell you, the grain of the tannins. They're still, I mean, they still need some time, but you can immediately tell that the potential of the aging of this wine with the structure. a wine that I love.
And what I love, I opened up the 15 a couple hours before we started, and yes, it does have that tannic structure there, but still on the attack, it's still very beautiful. The aromas there, you can certainly tell that this wine obviously has a long way to go, but certainly
And
very
a
approachable.
great sapidity, and what is most of the vintages of Il Poggio so evident the long aftertaste that the wine is coming back. So the long finish.
Mm-hmm. For 2015, what kind of other vintages in the cellar under the winery does this remind you of with so many vintages that you've been able to experience?
82 for me is similar to 82, and in more recent vintages, probably you remember something of 2004. There are the sapidity of this wine is similar to 2004. These are the more or less the more similar vintages to 15.
I'm going to turn this over to Keith, actually, because I know that he has a specific vintage question here of a vintage that you may not have mentioned yet so far. Keith, I'll pass it over to you.
Hey, Laura, how are you? I'm just curious, you didn't mention 97 when you went through the list of some of your knockout favorites. I believe 97 was probably one of the best vintages for Tuscany. What would you say about your 97? Did you just skip over it because it was just okay and you found others that were much better?
No, it's been a fantastic vintage. But for my and was a warm vintage. The wine was so generous, already round when I was younger. Me personally, I prefer a little bit more rustic vintages, but it's just my personal taste. 97 is a fantastic vintage, but I like Sangiovese with a little more acidity because it's the quintessential of Sangiovese is the acidity and a little more rustic tannin. 97 was so enjoyable. It's still so enjoyable, but maybe less interesting from an evolution point of view.
Thank you.
So when you look at Il Poggio as a vineyard and was classified as Chianti Classico Riserva until switching over to Gran Selezione, how would you compare, just when you talk about Il Poggio as a wine versus the Chianti Classico Riserva, which is a totally kind of separate idea? How do those fit in together in the story of Monsanto?
Well, it's a parallel story because also the Chianti Classico Riserva was born in 1962, and of course the grapes were coming from all the other vineyards inside the property. And at Monsanto, since the 1990s, so from 62 to 1990, we never produced the Annata. So the winery was only focused on Riserva. And there was and there is a reason. The type of soil that we have here, the microclimate, we have a soil called, in Tuscany it's called Galestro, which is an ancient stratified clay, similar to a limestone. It's a type of soil that gives tannins to the wine that need more time to show themselves. So an area more vocated for Riserva than for a younger wine as the Annata is. So we produce much more, also today, we produce much more Riserva than Annata, which is a unique thing. Usually in most of the producer of Chianti Classico, it's vice versa. We produce 1 bottle Annata, 4 bottles of Riserva, to give you an idea. But the story of these two wines are parallel, of course. And in some vintages, when Il Poggio was not produced, so all the grape of Il Poggio went into the Riserva. So let's say, in some vintages, the Riserva benefit of the of the Il Poggio.
And from an aging standpoint, how does the Chianti Classico Riserva kind of compare as far as that, where you see the sweet spot of ageability for that wine?
Also the Riserva can age very well. We don't keep so many bottles of Riserva because we don't have the space to keep also that bottle. But we do some vertical tasting of Riserva, and the last we made, the oldest was 30 years old, and it was still showing very well. So the life of Riserva for sure is not comparable to Il Poggio, which is now almost 60 years old, but 30, 35 years old, no problem.
Wonderful, wonderful. So
the aging of the wine is given by the tannin, and the tannin are created by the soil. And more or less, we have the same type of soil inside the property.
So when we look at Il Poggio, we just tasted the 2015. Where have the last few years? What do we have to look forward to coming over? Releases over the next few years for this wine and for Monsanto.
You mean the coming vintages? Yeah. 15 has just been released. Il Poggio is released with the same aging of a Brunello, so 5 years from the harvest. But in front of us, we have another great vintage, which is 16, outstanding vintage in all over Tuscany. And I'm very happy also of 17 and 18. 18, a very small quantity for Poggio. We needed to make some selection. And a big promise is also 19. So I could say I'm satisfied of the coming vintages.
Excellent, wonderful. It looks like we have a couple questions as well. Kevin, I don't see. Oh, there you are. I'll have you ask your question here. Hold on one second. Let me unmute you here.
It's actually one of our other guests who I think was logged in through the Wine Berserkers crew. So if you've got
the other one.
Yeah, if you got a question about the 68 Reserva, raise your hand and we'll unmute you if we can see you.
That's me.
There you go. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Roy.
Hey, Roy.
I was just curious. I have a 68 Reserva that I got through like a rare wine package. How's that doing? Should I drink that soon?
Beautiful. 68 was a vintage with a touch of botrytis on the grape.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a vintage with an incredible sweetness in the aftertaste. But also a great complexity in the palate. When I said before 69, I needed to think 5 minutes if say 69 or 68, because one of my favorite is also 68, but I couldn't tell two vintages one close to the other. Yeah, it's a vintage that I'm sure you can keep for some other years, but spectacular now.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So we have our friend Lars, who I know is a great fan of Tuscany and of Italy. And Lars has a really fun question that I'm interested to see, especially with Julia on here, what the response is. So Lars, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, John. Ciao, Laura.
Ciao, nice to see you.
Wonderful to see you. So I remember years ago when I had the pleasure of visiting the estate and meeting your father, gave us a great tour. And he very proudly pointed out a section of the cellar where he had little caves set aside for each of his grandchildren with their names on them.
Yes.
Does that still exist? Are they allowed in?
Yeah, it says an important tradition inside the family. when there is an important event like a wedding or a baby birth, we put about 150 bottles in this niches.
Niche, yeah.
Niche close by a gate of the vintage when the wedding was or when the baby birth. And there is a rule in the family, the children, they cannot open the gate before 25 years. Otherwise, they could get drunk without appreciate the gifts. And so we hope that the future of Monsanto will understand the philosophy, the beauty of the aging of the wine, a gift to the future.
That's fantastic. Wonderful tradition.
Thank you.
Definitely very good. And you know, as Kevin and I were able to visit you last year, we were able to see, like I said, all the different pockets and different you know, cages there. So it's good that it's behind lock and key, not to be able to access.
We don't trust them.
Too young, yeah, too young, and even to see all the different ways to protect that. So very good. Well, we'll go ahead, and at this point, I'll open it up to anybody else that may have some questions or anything they may be curious about Monsanto or about what is going on currently in Tuscany. And actually, we have one more. John Hunt, I'll pass it back to you because I know you had one more question regarding kind of the different wood that is being used as well.
Well, yes, thank you, Ms. Laura. You were mentioning that you changed your process a little bit. You said the winemaking process is unchanged, but you had changed on the wood a little bit, and I was wondering what factors affected that decision to change wood.
During the long period of the 70s and the 80s in larger cask, 3 years and a half in larger cask, there was a way of aging where the wine has a really slow oxygenation to be riper and smoother. Where the wine made the malolactic fermentation step by step by itself. You need to know that in the 80s or even in the 70s, in the winemaking knowledge, the malolactic was something not known, that was something empiric at that moment. So at the beginning of middle of the 90s, we wanted to experiment barriques to see if, let's say, stronger oxygenation, because barrique can give in shorter time more oxygen to the wine, and so create a faster maturation for the wine. Would have been a good instrument for a Poggio. What we realized after 10 years is that the wine is stronger than the method used to produce it. If you taste vintages in the 90s, and now the oak is not there anymore. The wine has been stronger than the oak. So that in 2000 we decided to go back to a less oxygenation with larger barrel. Is something. I'll say in English, is something. The wine is more. Need this time also in the oak. We cannot accelerate this process. Larger barrel for Sangiovese are better. They do not overpower the fruit of the grape. It's something that integrate better.
Better result, and that's what you want.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Keith, I'll pass it over to you for your question about what's going on in the region currently.
Thanks again. Laura, I think you might have mentioned it before, but could you just go back and touch on how producers are dealing with drought issues in the region?
Yeah, this is a world problem. It's not only here. It's also true that there are some recent vintages like 14, like 13, where we had a lot of rain. What is really changing is that when it's raining really hard, much more thunderstorm, higher risk of hail than in the past. And when it's warm, it could be really hot. But it's doing like this. Every vintage, cooler vintages, warmer vintages, up and down. We are lucky. We are lucky because we are working with Sangiovese. Sangiovese is a type of varietal that really need a lot of sun. Sangiovese is a grape that born with a lot of acidity, and if it's not well ripe, it could be unbalanced. So need a lot of sun. And of course, we are working also in the vineyard to give more hydration. We use a system like Sobecho, that in English I think is green manure. We plant some other, some grasses, some cereals, able to give hydration to the soil and element to the soil like potassium or magnesium to help the vine. We don't like high density in the vineyard. We think that the Sangiovese roots need to go down, so not too much competition between a vine or another and the other. So the root can go down and reach the water under the soil. And we also like Sangiovese to have a large canopy of leaves, so to have the photosynthesis. These are all elements to help the vine not to be too much stressful by dryness.
Interesting. Keith, thank you for that. So Laura, as we kind of wrap up here, looking at, obviously, we don't know where, the short-term future is going to be, for the region and for the winery, but where is kind of in your conversations with, your peers across the region of what does, 2020 look like as a region, and then, for Monsanto for the next couple of years of, how you're going to be able to respond to what's going on currently.
You mean about the current situation of
really, I mean, with
market?
We just got over potential of tariffs, that we got through that here in the U.S. With Italian wines, and we move right into a global crisis, and looking at how the plan for Monsanto for the future, if things were maybe put on hold that you were planning to do at the winery, and maybe now looking at the reality of the situation of what kind of the plan might be for this vintage in the next couple.
Well, it's not an easy question, honestly. It depends what's going on in the next future. Yeah. For sure, the lockdown of restaurants in most of the market is a big issue, and it is affecting and is going to affect the business of our wines, of all the wines sold in the restaurant, no question. Mm-hmm. Hopefully it's not going to last too long. And of course, it's also true that people didn't stop to drink wine, but trying to to drink at home, and so the off-premise business has jumped with the online, with other way of buying wine. Of course, it's now rebalancing the loss in the on-premise, in the restaurant, and we really pray for all of them to start to open their business. And then we will face the situation step by step, of course.
No, absolutely. And I know that it's difficult to see, you know, what that will have an effect on this vintage and coming, but certainly I know that, you know, with you know, a reputation like Monsanto, people are still looking for it, which is a good sign of all the work that, you know, your family has done over the past, you know, 50+ years, and so that's great to see. So if there are no kind of further final questions, Laura, I wanted to thank you.
Thank you.
The last thing here, as we talked about the 2015 and 09 Il Poggio, if you had any curiosities about how to get those wines through our wonderful kind of connection with you with VinConnect, we have that offer that is available now. So feel free to click on the link for anyone that might be interested in that. And Laura, thank you so much for your time, and we wish you all the best in opening up and for the harvest that is coming here in the fall, and hopefully on this side of the pond or on that side that we'll see each other again soon in person.
I wait for you in Tuscany soon, okay, at Monsanto, and to share a real glass of wine together, not a virtual one.
Cheers to that, everyone, and thank you everyone so much for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao Susie. Ciao.
Ciao, grazie.
Grazie.